everyone? Shintai here, and I have with me my good buddy Dom. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I got myself a paperclip.
Wow, only people who have played the game would have gotten that, probably. Even if you played the game, you may not have gotten that.
Yeah.
So, today we're going to be talking about Hotel Dusk Room 215. Now, this is a game that Dom here recommended me, and it's a game that means a lot to you, I can tell. It's a game that you played when you were younger, and based on what you've told me, you've played it over and over again, multiple times. So, I found it for $3, and I was like, well, shit, that's a great price for a game that means so much to Dom. Yeah, I'm gonna go for it. And I was really pleasantly surprised with it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good game, and I can see why it meant a lot to you, and why you probably replayed it a lot. So why don't you real quick just say your history with the game so people can get an idea of where you're coming from.
I saw a trailer for the game on that old G4 show Cinematech, and I thought that whole art style just grabbed my eye, the rotoscoping pencil sketch animation. And I was like, okay, I'll keep a close eye on this game. And then the game came out and I bought it for full price. And another reason it means a lot to me, it was really the game that kind of convinced me that video games can be a really effective, storytelling art form.
Awesome.
It was one of the very few games I actually owned for the DS at that time, so it means a lot to me for that, because I actually got more use out of the DS I barely even used.
Yeah, when you tend to not have many games for something, then you tend to replay it a lot.
Yeah.
Alright, that's awesome. And I do want to talk about the art style real quick, because I agree, it is easily one of the most standout things about the game. I absolutely love the art style. I think it's fantastic. It's got this really distinct look to it, and it really sets the game apart. I've never seen a game look like this before, and the team did a great job of coming up with it and implementing it well with the overall feel of the game and the writing as well, because it's kind of a noir-esque type of story, and I think the art style just fits so perfectly with that. Absolutely wonderful character portraits and animations. Just great.
Yeah, definitely. When I played the game, I was just like, damn, it actually looks very lifelike. That was actually kind of the game that actually kind of introduced me to the concept of rotoscoping animation.
I remember the video that you showed me that talked about how they came up with it and how the process works and how they make it, and it was really interesting. And I'll go ahead and link that in the description for those interested. It's a really good video and shows how they came up with the style. It's actually for the sequel Last Window, but it's still the same art style, so you could still watch it and get the same information for Hotel Dusk as well.
Yeah, in the case of Last Windows, character sprites, the characters have more detail to them than the first game, which is nice, and I think the animations look even smoother.
And even though this is a DS game, I thought that the 3D environments looked decent, pretty decent for a DS game. Usually I feel like 3D in a DS game can be pretty hit or miss, and I feel like in this game it was fine. I didn't really have any problems. Basically, I had no problems with this game visually. It looked good.
Some people did complain that a lot of the walls had a bunch of white blotch spots and corners, and I think it's just more to make it look kind of like a painting, because one of the recurring things in the game is paintings.
Yes, which we'll get into later.
Yeah.
I wasn't wowed by the soundtrack or anything, but I thought it was a pretty solid soundtrack, and I thought it fit the game. And for me, I think that's most important. I know some people are like, no, the soundtrack needs to be able to stand on its own. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Every element in a game needs to serve the game. Whether it be the writing or the gameplay, it needs to serve the experience. It doesn't necessarily need to stand on its own. And I feel the music does serve the experience more than serve itself as its own soundtrack.
I really love the music in the game personally. Like a couple of the tracks in the game are I put in like my favorite tracks in video games. Like the music that plays when you're in the basement near the end of the game, the piano track.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
That was ambient, kind of haunting. Like you have no idea what's going to happen next.
Actually, one track I particularly liked was whenever Kyle was reminiscing about the hour that just passed, and he was in his head trying to sort things out. I kind of liked that kind of like bass track.
Another one of my favorite tracks is like the song that plays whenever. It's pretty much every moment when Kyle says, "Yeah, you screwed up in your life, but things can get better." Just that really upbeat, like cheer up music.
Before we start talking about the writing, I want to talk about the puzzles in this game because I'm of two minds of the puzzles in this game because I do feel like this game does have some really good puzzles. One thing I really like about the puzzles in the game is that a lot of them are mundane, but the game, makes it interesting. Like you'll do stuff like a little girl will have a puzzle and you have to help her complete the puzzle. Or you have to open up your suitcase because your key broke. Really everyday things that like normal people would have to do. And I really like that concept. But at the same time, I do feel that like some puzzles were a little too easy and others were really fucking crazy difficult. And there were times where I just buckled down and I was just like, okay, fine, I'll just look up the guide. And then find out this crazy solution. And I'd just be like, you can't be serious. How was I supposed to figure this out? Like, I was just saying with the briefcase. What you had to do in order to open the briefcase was you had to get some pliers from the linen closet. You then had to go back into your room where there was a coat hanger. You have to use the pliers to cut a piece of the coat hanger and then use that to open up your suitcase. And I was just like, how in the fuck was I supposed to figure that out?
Yeah, I was 12 years old when I was playing that. I was like, okay, I'll just look up a walkthrough. Even I couldn't figure that out on my own.
But there are some puzzles, though, that are just perfect. Like, they just work really well. I really liked the two puzzles in the game where you had to close the DS in order to solve it. The first time was after you solved the little girl's puzzle. There's a message behind the puzzle, and then you had to close the DS, and then you could see what was on the back. That was really creative, thinking outside of the box, and I really liked that. And then there was another time in the game where you had to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. You had to close the DS in order to solve that puzzle as well. Really good stuff. But then there are some other puzzles, again, where it's just, how was I supposed to figure this shit out?
About the open and close puzzles, that pretty much makes the game unplayable on 2DS.
You're right! It does! I didn't even think about that, but you're right.
Yeah, if you have a 2DS and no DS or 3DS, you're fucked. The game is basically unplayable at that point. And about some of the puzzles, even though I love this game, some of the puzzles in Grim Fandango are ridiculous. They are pretty much, you need a guide for the entire game puzzles.
No, yeah, you're right. I remember trying to play Grim Fandango without a guide.
Yeah,
And I was not very successful.
Yeah, I adore Grim Fandango, but I don't play Grim Fandango for its puzzles. I more just play for its story, but I kind of prefer what Hotel Dusk does, where the puzzles, there are a few that you probably wouldn't figure out without using a guide, but it's not to the extent of Grim Fandango, at least.
I think the one, not to dwell on that game too much, but I think the one puzzle that really set me over the edge was the one with all the multiple caves, and then but what you had to do was grab a signpost and place it in the pixel perfect position.
Yeah, I fucking hated that part. Like I didn't even know I was supposed to pick up the sign. I thought I was supposed to just go in a particular cave and hope I get it right.
No, me too. And I was stuck there for a long time.
Yeah, and then I grabbed it, and I'm like, where the fuck do I put this? Then I had to look up a video walkthrough to find the exact pixel I gotta put it on.
It's ridiculous, and thankfully Hotel Dusk is never that ridiculous.
Yeah.
But there are still a few puzzles here and there where it's a bit like, really, guys?
Yeah, I'd say, like, one of the particular ones is definitely the coat hanger one, but, I think one of the ones that I was kind of trying to figure out was near the end where you have to use graphite powder from your pencil to, make an outlet be able to conduct electricity again.
That one was also kind of ridiculous.
I mean, yeah, graphite can conduct electricity, but I didn't know that at the time. I was 12 years old.
I think the game also forced you had to like read that book first, which would tell you about the graphite. And then you had to get your pencil and rub it against a file inside of a desk. And then you would take the graphite and then place it near the plug, the electrical plug. And it's like, come the fuck on!
Yeah. If that nail file wasn't there, Kyle would have fucking died in there. Because that's actually one of the game overs if you don't do the code breaker puzzle quick enough, is you'll suffocate and die.
Yeah, which is pretty fucked up, actually.
Yeah, it's the only death in the whole game.
I remember the dialogue too, because I did die there. Kyle was saying something like, I can't believe I'm gonna die in Hotel Dusk. I hate this place. It was great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, he has some really awesome dialogue.
He does, and now that we're done talking about the puzzles, let's go ahead and talk about what is easily the best thing about this game, and that is the writing. So I'll go ahead and let you start it off. What is this game about?
The game is about an ex-detective from New York named Kyle Hyde, whose partner, Brian Bradley, has betrayed him in the police force, and he disappears, and Kyle wants to find out why. So he starts basically a 3-year quest to find him, and he now works as a door-to-door salesman for a company called Red Crown. So he gets sent on a job to Hotel Dusk to also find lost items, which is a side business his boss has. His job takes him to Hotel Dusk, and things aren't as quite as they seem, and things start to seem like they relate to Bradley in many ways.
Now, I think one of the best things about this game is the colorful cast of characters. There are a lot of characters in this game, and they're really well written. Even the ones that you may not necessarily like are still pretty well written characters. And I also have to give major props to this game for having one of the only likable child characters in a video game. They are few and far between, and this is a really great child character. Her name is Melissa. She can be a little bratty at times, but never to the point where she's really annoying. And I just thought she was adorable. A nice little girl for the most part. And she does deal with some pretty shitty things at times, especially when you find out what's up with her mother. But I think the arc that she has with her dad was really well handled. It's great. Like, I was just so surprised because I was ready to not like her. But as the game went on, I was just like, oh, she's a cutie.
She even has some funny dialogue of her own, like whenever she goes to see you to get her doll sewed up, like she mentions, like Summer, she said like that Kyle could fix the doll, and then she said, oh, then he said some other stuff, but I was starting to get bored and fall asleep, and he smells weird too. I was like, okay, that's adorable and that's great.
Yeah, because fuck Summers.
Summer, yeah, what a prick.
Fuck him.
I mean, he's not a jerk, he's just a pretentious snob and also kind of a scumbag at heart.
Granted, he did try to reconcile what he did to his friend, where he plagiarized his book. He did say that he was going to not turn himself in, but rather he was going to reveal what he did, that he was going to try and write his own book, his own like bestseller, without resorting to that sort of thing, and he was going to try and find his friend. So it wasn't a complete piece of shit. But yeah, he was really pretentious. He kept talking in like pseudo French and acting like he was so intelligent. Like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, I like how Kyle describes him perfectly, and like he's so an overblown walrus.
Which also leads to like one of my favorite lines in the entire game, where Summers is trying to guess like who Kyle really is, and he comes up with this like completely ridiculous theory about how Kyle's not actually a salesman, but he's like some undercover detective, and then the being a salesman is just a guise, and that all this stupid shit. And then Kyle's just thinking to himself, I'd like to deduce my fist with your face.
Yeah. There are actually only really a few things about Summer's story he kind of gets right. He does say, like, he's not an ordinary salesman, because if you look at Kyle, he clearly doesn't really have very good people skills, so he probably isn't that much of a salesman.
He wasn't completely off base.
Yeah, in sort of way, he was searching for like the mystery behind Angel opening a door, the Osterzone painting. That part was true, but he had no basis about it.
He wasn't a bad character. He was still pretty well written. They made him interesting in the sense like you wanted to know what happened. At some point in the game, because Kyle is nosy that way, he pretty much puts his nose in everyone's business at some point. You do basically, through brute force, try to figure out and like get out of Summer just what happened with his book and what happened between him and his friend Alan.
What's kind of interesting, like whenever he's finished interrogating him, like pretty much everybody else, he's kind of like the guy who's like giving, advice to everyone, even if he isn't particularly nice about it. Even to Jeff, he's at least trying to give him advice to basically save his own life. With Summer, he's just like, as soon as he hears his confession, he's like, fuck this, I had enough of you, I'm out of here.
Yeah, Summer was the only person in the entire cast of characters where we had that kind of interaction with, where he was completely dismissive and did not care.
Yeah, because while the character we're going to mention later, Jeff, was just a moron, Summer was kind of a scumbag.
Another character that you and I have some contention with is Iris.
She's very, very snooty and stuck up, and thinks way too highly of herself.
She doesn't seem too bad at first, but as the game goes on, she does seem very full of herself. She does have a rather tragic backstory, and I really liked it. But the problem is, I felt that her tragic backstory wasn't very reflective of her character, in that if she actually went through all of this, how the fuck did she turn out like this? It doesn't really make sense. You'd think she'd be a little less up her own ass.
She did get into like Hollywood and things like that, so maybe she just her personality kind of changed when she started hanging out with that group, maybe. But other than that, like, given what she's gone through, she thinks she'd be definitely more accepting of like people's shortcomings, like knowing what she went through. Where she pretty much lived on her own for a long time and basically made do completely on her own, and basically was separated from her sister for a long time, lost her mother in a plane crash. Do you think she would be a more modest, more compassionate person?
He wouldn't be overtly rude to her, but even still, like, no matter what you would say, at one point she'd just be like, oh, you're just an ill-mannered brute. Man, I'm just like, go fuck yourself.
There's actually something kind of interesting where when she offers you a drink, you have a choice to say no thanks and no way.
I thought that was great. I loved that.
Yeah.
I thought that was so good. Like, the game itself is basically saying, no, you really don't want to do this.
When you say no way, this is actually a more weird one. It's actually a little darker, like saying, you see these little scars on my fist? I don't know how they got there. I tend to black out a lot, It's almost like he was being somewhat threatening.
Oh, I picked, because, like, generally when I play games and I have a choice, I tend to go for the less aggressive option. That's just kind of how I am. So I didn't know that. That's really fucked up.
Yeah, and also it seems just a little, like, out of character for him. I think, like, some of the choices seem a little... Well, actually, some of the ones being out of character actually make sense, because saying the wrong things can occasionally get you kicked out of the hotel.
Yeah, I know. Like, I always suspected And I was mostly right, where if you have a choice and one is him like yelling, that's usually the wrong choice. Kyle only yells and gets really emotional in like very, very few instances. Most of the time he is very cool-headed, very calm, and just uses his cold, rational thinking logic to like deduce things. So him getting like over emotional like that is usually the wrong response, because again, he only does that in like a really heightened moment.
Yeah. And another thing about like Iris, there is a character in Last Window who has some similarities in personality to her, but is a bit more like, she also has a tragic backstory, but it's more reflective of her personality. Like, she's not really like a bitch for the sake of it. She's just kind of high strung and really stressed out. So I thought like that was handled better in Last Window. I thought that was one thing I think I think is kind of a flaw in someone Hotel Dusk's writing, because I think someone like that went through Iris's like life would be a more tolerant, more understanding person, at least to me.
One of the characters in this game that I absolutely loved, and that's Louis.
Yep, Louis Donano.
Louis is fucking awesome. I loved his character. He's basically the bro of the game. He's your bro.
Yeah.
And given the history that he has with Kyle, I think makes their relationship really interesting. They're kind of strange friendship in a way. I don't know if it's really accurate to say that they have a friendship, but they have a something, and it's a fascinating something.
You can't really call it a friendship, because a lot of times Kyle seems kind of like annoyed with Louis' presence sometimes.
But at the same time, you could tell he does appreciate that he's there.
Yeah, that which is cool, and that speaks a lot to Kyle's character. There's actually a similar character in Last Window, somewhat to Louis, like kind of a goofball, just kind of like buddy with Kyle near like some point in the game. So there won't be Louis, but there will be a stand-in, I guess.
Okay.
His personality is a bit different from Louis, though, even though they are both kind of like, womanizers. Like, Louis kind of like that's like the street smart, small time ex-con, while the other guy is more like, Southern California, kind of a rocker dude.
Interesting.
They're similar but different.
I really like Louis' character though, because like I was mentioning before, he has a bit of a history with Kyle.
Louis was a pickpocket in New York City that Kyle busted a number of times, and also set straight, unknown to Kyle that he actually set him straight.
So it turns out that Louis was best friends with this guy named Danny, and the two of them were kind of small-time crooks together, and they would steal and pickpocket and that kind of thing. And that's a big reason why Kyle knew Louis, because Kyle was a police officer and would bust him a lot. But the two of them would like come up with schemes together and stuff like that. But turns out his friend Danny got a little in over his head and started associating with this crime syndicate called Nile. As a result, he got caught up in this business, which is tied closely with the events that occur in Hotel Dusk as a whole. Or rather, it's very tied with the main plot of Hotel Dusk, and that is this theft of a painting. Danny unfortunately got killed by Kyle's partner Bradley under the orders of Nile, and Louis, being completely blindsided by this event, skipped town and got the fuck out of Manhattan and found himself at Hotel Dusk. It's a pretty screwed up backstory to have, and it does make you feel sorry for Louis and does open up his character a bit, because when you first see him, he does seem like just kind of a goofball, and then you find out this backstory about him, and you do see him in a different light.
Yeah, and even past that, even without that, you can still kind of tell he's more than just the comic relief. He's kind of a three-dimensional character himself.
He's a genuinely really good character. He's really likable, and he helps out Kyle a lot throughout the game. He's a great addition to the cast.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember like this speech he made when at the bar where he says he doesn't really mind being a bartender or really a bellhop at the at the hotel, because as long as he's happy doing what he does, he doesn't care what kind of job he has. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
I really liked the story that Kyle told Louis about his dad.
Yeah, when Kyle was a kid, his dad, who was a thief, was killed during a job. So basically, he tells this story to Louis to set him straight. Basically, he says hey, if you keep doing this stuff, you're eventually gonna get the barrel of a gun someday. You wanna get out of this. Don't live your life like this, and that worked.
What's interesting is that Louis thought that Kyle was pulling his leg and was just making the story up in order to set him straight. And you do have the option of saying that it was a lie, that he was just lying. But the truth is that Kyle was actually talking about something that actually happened with his dad, and it wasn't just something he made up to set Louis straight. It was a real event in his life.
Yeah, I think the option to say he was making it up would be because Kyle is mostly a private person who doesn't really like to go on about his past at all, because the death of his dad actually still affects him even into adulthood. So pretty much him saying it was a lie would be a way of him shutting out, saying yeah it's not true, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a different way of interpreting it.
This isn't really much of a spoiler. This is on the back of Last Window, saying that Kyle's dad's death is a major part of Last Window's story arc. It's on the back of the case, so it's not a spoiler. Last Window actually paints a even more wounded side of him. His dad's death still really affects him even into his adulthood. It really affected him that much and shaped him into who he is as a person. So you actually even get even more character depth about Kyle and how he became that way.
One of the characters in the story that was very integral was Mila. And she's actually silent for the majority of the game, which I thought was interesting, because one of the things I really liked was Kyle carries with him a notebook, and the only way he could interact with her and talk with her was to hand her the notebook so she could write things down. And then eventually, at some point in the game, she does start talking. I really like this because it kind of felt like you could kind of interpret it as subtle character development, in that she is slowly accepting what has happened to her, and by the time she starts talking is when she's willing to divulge the information about her father and the trauma that she went through and the fact that she got into a coma for a decade.
The purpose she serves in the story is that she's almost in a way the main in a sense victim of the story. Well, probably the most tragic, probably either the most tragic backstory or the second most, next to the hotel's owner, Dunning.
Yeah, we'll get into Dunning soon. I think the thing that made Mila's backstory especially difficult was that her dad is kind of a scumbag.
Yeah, and became an even bigger scumbag if you listen to Dunning's and also Bradley's story, the one that he told Dunning. He pretty much became so much deeper into denial. He basically became almost like a borderline sociopath, and became more interested in business than anything else.
He did have some shred of humanity in him, in that he would visit his daughter once a month for 10 years.
Yeah.
But apparently Bradley may have used that to his advantage in order to take him out.
Yeah. What's kind of interesting about her father, Robert Evans, is that did he become a bigger scumbag when his daughter went into a coma, or Was he always kind of that way? That's something that wasn't really touched on, but it's kind of interesting.
It probably would make more sense that if that happened to his daughter, that it would mentally affect him and that he would probably become worse as the years went on.
Yeah, because there was no guarantee she would even wake up from her coma. Woodward, Melissa's father, said that her recovery was pretty much a miracle.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when she wakes up, is too late.
Yeah, her dad is already dead at that point. I'd kind of say, good riddance. Bradley got his revenge.
Apparently, Bradley got in with Niall. Because of Niall and because of Mila's father, Robert Evans, basically killed Bradley's sister, also named Mila, which Bradley had a bracelet of. And Robert Evans just went, well, you've got nothing now, so just work for Niall. And Bradley, realizing that he had nothing, just accepted.
What was especially scummy about that was Bradley had done exactly what he was told to do, like get information the NYPD has on us, and we'll let her go. And then the mob shows its true colors and does whatever they want.
Yeah, originally it was that Niall had his sister, and that he had to perform some tasks in order to get his sister back, and they didn't uphold their end of the bargain.
Evans pretty much wanted to basically own Bradley at that point. He just wanted, like, you know what, work for me. That's it.
But in pushing him too far, ended up backfiring on him and pretty strongly implied that Bradley just killed Robert Evans, especially that one line that he told Dunning at the bar, that you will never see Robert Evans again.
A lot of the characters we don't see are also very interesting characters, in of themselves. Evans, Bradley, and even Melissa's mother.
Yeah, Grace.
Yeah, and it's implied she also got involved with Niall in some way.
Yeah, in order to pay off the money for the lawsuit.
Yeah, and as a result, she probably either went on the run or was forced to work with them even further.
Real quick, I also want to talk about Dunning, because Dunning is very integral to this as well. So throughout the story, there is a pretty consistent theme of painting, and a character that is brought up more than once, Osterzone, or Osterson, or however you want to pronounce it, is this painter from like the 19th century that, painted these great paintings, and art collectors are going crazy over it. And it turns out that there is no Osterzone. He was just this made-up painter that Robert Evans and Dunning Smith just basically poofed into existence to, one, prove that Robert Evans had an eye for art, and to prove that Dunning was indeed a great artist. Because at the time, Dunning tried to get into the art world and tried to come up with these great paintings, and nobody cared. But right when they came up with this fake painter and Robert wrote a book about it, suddenly people give a shit. And at first everything was cool, but then Dunning eventually just got tired of it because he didn't like the fact that people were praising this painter that didn't exist and not him. And eventually he just got sick of it, which is definitely understandable.
Yeah, and then Evans got involved. Basically Niall found out that Osterzone is really just a scam, and then decided to rope Evans into it. So when Dunning was like, fuck this, I'm not doing this anymore, Niall kidnapped his daughter and leveraged him into painting more, or else they would kill her. That's pretty much why he has the most tragic backstory. His daughter is taken away from him and never sees her again for 10 years.
It's fucking brutal.
Thankfully, in the post-credits scene, which you unlock by not getting a game over, she comes back. So there is a sense of hope there.
I really, really liked that. I thought that was great. I'm not sure how Jenny found her way back there. Like, I don't know if Niall upholded their end of the bargain, or if it was some third party or something. I don't know. But I was just glad to see Dunning, who, yeah, like you said, had one of the most tragic backstories along with Mila, finally had some redemption in the end. That was really good.
I think it was pretty much Niall upholding their end of the bargain, even though it seems a little bit strange because the Mafia are not, well, people like Niall are not compassionate people. They'll pretty much kill. They'll pretty much dispose of anyone that they don't need anymore. So maybe, or maybe Bradley was involved somehow.
I'd like to believe it was Bradley. Because the way I see it, Bradley probably relates to Dunning in that his sister was snuffed out by Niall, and Dunning is in a similar situation with his daughter, and I'm sure he didn't want the same thing to happen. So I'd like to think that it was Bradley that found Jenny and brought her back to Dunning.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
It's just an assumption on my end, so I'm not really sure, but that's what I'd like to think.
I kind of like ambiguity. Allows you to make, assumptions about stuff.
Now, we've been praising the writing a lot, but I do think that there are some issues that need to be addressed. One thing that I felt was strange in the game was the game, to me, kind of lacked focus in that a lot of the time you were doing just kind of random stuff, and there was no real, main plot to progress. It was mostly just talking to all of the different characters and finding out their backstories and finding out their side stories and stuff. And as a result, the game did kind of feel like there was a lack of focus and that there wasn't a main driving force in the narrative. And it wasn't until there was bits and pieces of it here and there, and especially in the last couple of chapters where the main story really kicks it into high gear. And not to say that there was anything wrong with any of the other side stories, because they were interesting, and it was nice hearing about all these other different characters and their stories and what they had to say. But it did also lead into this, again, lack of focus.
Yeah, I kind of attribute some of that to just being, it's pretty much like adventure game design in general, where you're kind of just doing these things for really no exactly plot related reason. You're just kind of getting them out of the way because it has to be done for something to happen. I think that's just adventure game design in general.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, Grim Fandango had a ton of that. You're doing these very bizarre item combination stuff that doesn't make any sense, and it'll trigger something later on.
But I think a bigger problem is the level of convenience in the writing.
Yeah.
It just so happened that all of these people are in Hotel Dusk, and all of them have some weird connection to either Niall or Bradley or each other or something.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up Last Window again real quick, because this is something actually does better. Not everyone there in the place it's set in is hiding a dark backstory that's connected to Niall in some way. Some of them do have connections, but some of their connections are kind of minor. And then there are some people who aren't really hiding anything at all. They're just regular people. And actually makes it feel more realistic.
That does sound more realistic, because basically the only character in the whole game that didn't have some deep, dark backstory was Melissa.
But even then, she had some kind of tertiary connection to Niall because her mother.
Right, but that's not her fault.
Yeah, it's not her fault at all.
But basically, almost every character was connected to Niall in some way, or was directly involved with someone that was dealing with Niall or something.
That's actually one of the criticisms some people, even fans, have of the game, is that everyone has a moment with Niall, and I agree with that. That's a little bit too convenient.
I think, in particular, while I did like what happened with Jeff Angel's character, and I really like the moment where Kyle just brings down the hammer on him, basically you're a stupid fucking kid. What do you think you're doing? You think you're smart? You're just a punk.
Yeah.
At the same time, connecting his father to Niall was completely unnecessary.
I suppose so, but I think it was kind of the have Kyle say, yeah, if you go public with this, you and your old man will be killed, because it kind of makes sense for, I guess, Jeff's father to be connected to Niall, because even people in Niall need lawyers.
No, I understand that, and let me put it this way: if there wasn't so many other characters with connections to Niall, then I would have been okay with this. But as far as like the other characters go, who all have connections to Niall, I think this one didn't really need it as much as the other ones, and it could have been written out, and not much would have been lost.
And actually, it could have been interesting if they actually brought up the name of an actual, crime family. Like, it could have said, like, his dad was a lawyer for the Gambino crime family. That would have been fine.
Oh, yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few 70s references in there. They're subtle and few and far between, thankfully.
Like Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo. I love that. Just, like, you find a secret passage, and Louie's like, that's like that cartoon about the dog and the guy that's always hungry. And another, like, reference I kind of thought was clever was, like, you're in the kitchen and you just examine some canned food, and Kyle's like, well, at least we'll be prepared when the Soviets drop the big one. Which is a kind of sly reference to the fact the Cold War was still going on. Other than that, I was actually kind of surprised. I actually kept there would be like references because like Phoenix Wright likes to do this a lot, like sneak in some really clever like pop culture references. And some of them work, and sometimes are kind of like, okay, a little cringeworthy. But with Hotel Dusk, they keep it pretty much to a minimum. At least it was good they didn't like sneak in like. I don't know, references to stuff like Star Wars. That wouldn't, I don't know, it would just be a little distracting.
But another thing that I felt was really convenient was when you're bowling and Louis accidentally throws a bowling ball into one of the potted plants. And this potted plant just so happened to have a key in it for the wine cellar. And then in the wine cellar, there is a secret passage into the underground basement where you find out all sorts of secrets and stuff. And it really did feel to me like they just didn't know how to progress the story at that point. Like they didn't know, like, okay, we need to get the player to go into this place somehow. We don't know how to do that, and they came up with this, and it was kind of silly.
I think with the key, I think this is a way they could have, like, did something better to still make that key exist. Like, there's, like, a part where you're near the end where you're snooping around Dunning's bedroom. You could just be looking around like, hey, where's Mila? And then you start looking around and you find this mysterious key, and you start trying it on everything, and then you just open the wine cellar.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been fine. Like, they could have made it so that, because normally Mila is on the roof.
Yeah.
They could have just simply made it so that she doesn't spawn on the roof until you find the key first. One thing in the game that I thought was really weird was when you find out that Dunning is actually Osterzone. There is a code-breaking computer, and you have a letter with a code on it. And you type the code in, and then it tells you, okay, Osterzone is Dunning. Why does he have this here?
That's one I can't even really come up with a clear answer to.
The only thing I could possibly come up with is that originally the hotel was made by Niall, I think?
I think the underground part was. The hotel was more just an ordinary hotel.
And that maybe it was a leftover from when Niall used to own it or whatever.
Yeah.
But why would Robert Evans send a letter to Dunning with a code on it specifically to reveal to Dunning, I guess, that he is Osterzone? That doesn't make any sense to me.
This is a way I think they could have done it. Like, if the code was, like, on a separate piece of paper that came with it, like, pretty much all the leverage against you is gone. Here, take this paper, do whatever you want with it, and no one will know your secret. Something like that. Like the paper was, like, something you would hand to someone who probably had, like, a coding device. Or so they could basically say, yes, this guy is Osterzone, or something like that. That's the only thing I could ever say it could ever actually work.
And the thing is, I think what it was the developers wanted to put a puzzle in there to reveal that to have that reveal, because it is a good reveal. I kind of guessed it beforehand, but it's still a good reveal. It's still a good, like, oh, awesome, this is cool. But I just feel that the way that they went about it wasn't exactly the right way. And I feel that their desire to put in a cool puzzle, while they had their heart in the right place of, let's make up this puzzle so you feel like you've earned this reveal, I just feel like they should have taken some different steps.
This is the way I think I would have done the Osterzone reveal, and that's it's when you discover like that room with the painting supplies and the painting. Like, instead of the whole painting being covered in white paint, you just walk in, you see Angel opening a door, and Kyle's just like, "What the fuck?" And then you see all the painting supplies, and like then Kyle actually starts to connect it together. Like, then he also finds that book in the storage room. He's like, maybe Osterzone is a scam.
I think it would have been interesting if he had like a moment like what they did in Phoenix Wright, where like towards the end of the case, you have kind of like this line of logic that the characters have, and they start putting together pieces of logic and evidence in their head, and then they come up with the solution. They could have put something similar to that, like obviously not the exact same thing. They could have had something in the same vein as that, of you as the player help Kyle in his mind put together the logic and the evidence, and you put it together, and then you figure out, boom, Dunning is Osterzone.
Yeah, pretty much. It would actually even bring out further the fact that Kyle is actually, a brilliant detective. He can actually figure that out, and since you also figure it out, you also feel like him, and that's perfect character, connection.
Because I think the interesting thing about Kyle is that he kind of acts like an oaf in the game. Not necessarily stupid, but he kind of acts like a crassy kind of guy. And the thing is, he does have really brilliant deductive talents, to the point where Bradley, at the end of the game, has a letter for him basically going, I knew you would figure this out because you're a fucking bulldog. You just go in and you just figure shit out. That's just what you do. He had such confidence in him, and he was right.
Some people criticize that as like convenience. Like, no, there's no way Bradley would be able to plan all this out. Like, no, I think he knew his partner that well.
No, I think he knew his partner well enough that he would be able to just go in there and crack the code. And now I don't think that's necessarily convenience. I just think that, given the history that these characters have, that they were partners for several years, Bradley probably did figure that Kyle would be able to muscle his way through the hotel and just figure shit out.
This is something about Kyle. Like, we talked a bit about him, but never talked much about like his personality, how he acts towards people, or his motivations behind things. We'll talk about that a little. Kyle is pretty much a film noir protagonist through and through. He's somewhat antisocial. He's a jerk with a heart of gold. He's a bit of an alcoholic.
I always like the lines of dialogue whenever you analyze alcohol. He's always like, oh, why do you tempt me?
Yeah, that's great. And it was also funny, like, when you're drinking like scotch at the bar, and like Kyle starts describing like his drink in detail, like, this is the love of his life, like, a single sliver of ice slips beneath the glass, never to rise again. And also, like something with a film noir protagonist, he kind of unintentionally gets the attention of the ladies as well. Even though he doesn't mean to, sometimes women seem to kind of find him fascinating.
Rachel in particular fancies him.
Yeah, Rachel, and even Iris to some extent. Even though she doesn't like him, she probably does find him kind of fascinating in her own way.
I really like Kyle's character because I think that he works really well as this kind of down in his luck ex-cop detective, just trying to find his old partner and he does feel a bit old hat as far as like noir protagonists go, but I think that works in his favor because he isn't simply a carbon copy or cutout of that stereotype. He fits into it, but he still makes it his own, which I think is what makes him such a good character.
Yeah, I do like that about him. Like, usually with a film noir protagonist who is kind of an asshole, they're usually completely assholes, but they usually do good things, but they never really say anything nice or try to help people emotionally, usually.
I'd say Kyle is much more balanced in that respect. I was kind of surprised playing the game how much of a prick Kyle could be from time to time, but he also does have his moments where he shows genuine concern and does try to help others pretty selflessly.
In the first game where he seems kind of hesitant, in the second game he tries to get a little more involved. Well, that's because actually his personality is a bit different in the sequel, because he's a more relaxed, less tortured guy, because he's figured out the mystery with Bradley, so there's less stress on his life.
Alright, you want to wrap things up?
To those watching, we fucking spoiled it, but if you don't care about spoilers and you just want a really good adventure game / visual novel, this is perfect for you. And it's one of my favorite video games of all time, despite all its flaws. And it still holds a special place in my heart, even after 7 years.
Cool. I really liked it. I thought it was really enjoyable. Better than I expected, actually. I didn't expect it to be like bad necessarily, but that I did expect it to be a certain way. I was pretty much expecting it to be a murder mystery, and the whole game was going to be like figuring out, like finding clues and figuring out this murder or something, and it wasn't that at all. It takes its own unique and interesting and different direction that I really appreciated. It wasn't simply just what I expected. It was more than that. It was its own experience. It was its own game, and I really enjoyed it. Even if I did have a few problems with it, well, first of all, I spent $3. I can't really complain that much. And I implore all of you, if you got a DS, if you got a 3DS, not a 2DS, because then the game is unbeatable. If you got a 2DS, you're fucked. But if you have a normal DS or 3DS, then I'd say definitely get this game. It's really good. It's cheap. Go for it. Really, really enjoyable. Anyways, thank you very much for joining me, Dom. Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, of course.
And hopefully I can bring you back when we talk about the sequel. This has been Shintai and Dom. Take care, everyone.